Let me remind you of some things that I mentioned at the very beginning with Isis and Osiris. It's probably a good night tonight to go over these. We're talking about myth and meaning. We're talking about stories that generate meaning. We're not talking about stories that are false. We're talking, in fact, about stories that are true. They're psychologically true. And we'll get into the nature of that truth tonight. What we've seen already is as above, so below. So we've seen this beautiful resonance between the notions of heaven or up there or whatever, all the way down to the body, and even inside the body. There's this beautiful symbolic resonance that is lost to us now. We're talking about universal ideas, Joseph Campbell called them, but I'd like to say that they're collective, more in a Jungian sense, collective ideas that form around archetypes, symbols that are meaningful. Again, meaning is what we're after here. The past versus the present. Myths are about the past, but that doesn't mean we can't bring them into the present. We have to be careful, though. We don't want to just lift a myth completely out of its context without realizing where it came from, because that will shape the meaning. And then, of course, where's Mario? There he is. Myths, Mario would say myths are postmodern, in that they are multivalent. There are many meanings, and that has to do with oral cultures that we talk about a lot, where truth doesn't exist. Truth is the product of the literate culture of writing. In orality, you have fluidity. You have many stories. And the more stories, the better. I'll tell you again a story that I've told you before, but maybe not all of you have heard, that I love. And that is a true story about a black coat, a missionary who came to the Seneca in upstate New York, and he gave them the gospel, and he said, there was the first man and first woman, and they sinned and fell, but there was a man who came, he was God's son, and he died for us, and now you can live again if you believe in him. And the Seneca said, cool, let us tell you a story about the origin of corn. And they did. And the missionary is furious. And he says, what I gave you was the truth, and you gave me fable and falsehood. And the Seneca are genuinely confused because he's being very rude, first of all. And secondly, they say, we believed your story, why don't you believe ours? There it is. There it is. We believed your story, why don't you believe ours? We're exchanging stories, aren't we? Right? Stories equal meaning. More stories equal more meaning. So, I like to talk about story as I. It's the perceptive lens of something. That's like the first level, the immediate recognition of the story. As a window, seeing through the literal meaning of the story to some more deeper meanings, symbolic meanings, collective meanings, excuse me, Jung would call them. And of course, if you keep looking, if you keep going, it becomes a mirror and you see yourself. All right. We've been in the ancient Near East for a while now. So I thought you'd like to see a sense of, a sense of what's happening there over a couple thousand years. So over here is Mesopotamia, Ishtar and Tammuz, Assyria, Babylon. Keep an eye on those. Keep an eye on Egypt, of course. And then right above Egypt is Israel, where we're going to be tonight. Notice what's happening here over the centuries. Babylon, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, back and forth. The Hyksos invade Egypt for a little while. Then they're gone. Egypt expands. Assyria and Babylon doing their thing. Kind of amazing to see it like this, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, I didn't do it. Don't. But yeah. All right. Egypt expands again, and then Israel appears, right? Around 1200. And watch what happens around 1000. I hope no one's tripping right now because this could be bad. Charlie. All right, Israel expands, right? And then keep your eye on Israel. Splits, Israel and Judah, northern kingdom, southern kingdom. Northern kingdom is the 10 tribes. Watch Assyria come in here. And the 10 tribes will eventually disappear and be found again in America by Joseph Smith. Judah remains the 2 tribes, but then watch Babylon come and eat Judah. And in fact, take them over to Babylon, right? And this is by the rivers of Babylon where we sat down and there we wept and remembered Zion. So you get Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel out of there, and you get a lot of the Psalms. Okay, I'm gonna have to do more animations for you guys. This is the Greek legacy, and watch Rome. Watch Roman come in here and just level everything. And Jesus, he's right there in the corner. He who has eyes to see, let him see. Yes. All right, so Adam and Eve, the story we think we know. Thank you for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for the image of Adam and Eve. Right? It's not just them, but that was the first image I found. So the story we carry around in our heads, most of us, is that this is the beginning of everything. And there's a perfect garden and a perfect couple, and there's a snake, and then the snake beguiles the woman, and then the woman beguiles the man. There's the fall from grace, from perfection, from God's presence, whatever. And then there's an expulsion from the garden. And this is the cause of all our problems. Right? Let's dig into it a little more. That's a literal interpretation. I'm always, I'm a... Okay, I see. More images, more jokes. Got it. I'm a religious studies scholar. I have the most annoying conversations about the Bible ever. And they're usually around this notion of literalism. Well, literalism is from the Latin that means letter, alphabetic sign, literature, or books. Okay? Great. What if you're dealing with a story that wasn't written originally? Like most stories, like every story almost that you think of when you think of mythology. Why would you want to take it literally when it was spoken, right? Why would you want to focus on the text? Note our approach to this story as a culture. Do you believe that Adam and Eve were real? Do you believe Genesis or Darwin? It's a very literal approach. What's interesting here is that this story is our story. As I said in the description tonight, it's even your story if you're not from the United States or the West. It's still your story because that story has been so pervasive in culture. Just ask the Seneca, who were speaking to the missionary. You can't get away from this story. It's a story, we talked a lot in these series here in the President's class about orality and literacy, about the difference between a storytelling culture and a literate culture where the stories get written down and frozen in time. Tonight, this story encapsulates this phenomenon. In fact, it's the pivot between mythos and logos. Mythos, the Greek word for myth, logos, the Greek word for truth. So you may have heard me say this a lot over the evenings we've spent together. There's a huge difference between meaning and truth. Mythos is about meaning. If I have meaning, it doesn't take away from your meaning. In fact, like the Seneca, the more meaning, the better. We need an excess of meaning. But if there's a truth, and I have it, and you're not like me, then you don't have the truth. And from that follows all kinds of bad things. Genocide, colonialism, etc. And just people being mean. Colonialism and people being mean. So yeah, were Adam and Eve real? I get that question all the time. And my answer has come to be over the years, why would I make this story that small? Why would I make a story that's our story so small to be literal when it can be meaningful? Let me show you what I'm talking about. All right, here's the literal story. There's not one, there's two. Now, you may have grown up like I did, reading the Bible, studying the Bible. I didn't even see this, which says something about myth. Is that once I show it to you, it's going to be abundantly clear. But most people live with this story in their heads as if it's one story. All right? The first story is Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 2:4. The second story picks up in 2:4 and goes to 2:24, and it actually goes beyond. Let me read you the two stories now, understanding that they're separate. Now you're going to listen for the differences now that I've told you. I've kind of given you some fruit of the tree, by the way. Sorry. So you're going to be able to see things that you couldn't see before. Am I a serpent? Yeah. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, and that's probably when God began to create the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Hear that pattern? Hear it again for 6 more times. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And so God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so, and God called the dome sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth vegetation, plants, etc., everything that bears fruit with the seed in it." And all your stoner friends from high school know this verse because it means God says you can smoke pot. And it was so. God brought forth, the earth brought forth vegetation, etc. God saw that it was good. The marijuana was good, he said. And there was evening and morning the third day. God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky that separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky, and God saw that it was good. And there was evening and morning and the 4th day. You getting bored yet? It is a rather long list. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." And God created great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, these are the animals and the creatures, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the sea, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and the morning, 5th day. And then God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle, creeping things," remember creeping things, "and wild animals of the earth of every kind." And it was so. And God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. What a list. And then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over every living thing." And God said, "See, I have given them to you for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps upon the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I've given every green plant for food," meaning you must be a vegetarian. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. God is very proud of himself. And there was evening and morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day. And he blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from the work he had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. Now, that last verse may be the end of the first story, or it may be the beginning of the second. We're not sure. So, here's the second. Okay, you heard the first. Da 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 da. Right? Listen to the second. In the day the Lord God made the earth and heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up. For God had not caused it to rain upon the earth yet, and there's no one to till the ground, foreshadowing. But a stream would rise from the earth and water the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord God made every tree to grow that was pleasant to the sight and good for food. And then there was a tree of life in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then the storyteller gets a little sidetracked. You know, there's a river that flows out of Eden to water the garden, and it divides and becomes 4 branches. The name of the first is Pishon. It's the one that, I don't know why I'm pronouncing it like it's French. It's the one that flows around the whole land of Havilah, where there's gold, as you know, right, listener? And the gold of that land is good, onyx, bdellium. The name of the second river is Gihon. It's the one that flows around the whole land of Cush. And the name of the third river is Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. And the fourth is Euphrates. Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, you know, you may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you will die. Then the Lord God said, it's not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner. And so out of the ground, the Lord God formed every animal. Animal is his helper at first. The Lord God formed every animal of the field, every bird of the air, and he brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all the cattle, to the birds of the air, to every animal of the field. But for the man, there was still not a helper as his partner. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, this at last is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken. All right. Those are 2 different stories. If you're not convinced, we could put it up on a chart. I don't think you need to be convinced. They sound very different. The order of creation is radically different. They're two different stories. Why? How? What's going on here? Well, biblical scholars have, for over a century now, figured this out, and they called it the documentary hypothesis. And basically, you can go by the name of God that's being used in the text. So, for example, in the first story, 1:1, the first that you come to in reading, that's the priestly, that's not a name of God, but that's a priestly source, so it's called P. The second story that I just read to you is called the J source, because it uses the name, well, Yahweh, which in German it looks like a J. Anyway, let's not get into that. It's just the J, meaning that's the term for God there is Yahweh. The term for God in the other source is Elohim, which is a Babylonian word, and it's plural, by the way, and we can get into that. So here's what it looks like. I'm being literal now with the text. There's J, comes out of the northern tribes. Remember that Assyria gobbled up. Here's E for the Elohist, and then you see J and E kind of merge in the southern kingdom, and then there's P way down here, so after 600 BCE, during the exile and the captivity, and then there's also a D that we don't have to get into. But so the oldest tradition, the oldest story of the two is the J story by far in terms of written history, and probably in terms of oral history too. And P is a highly literate text that you probably heard. It was a list, this and this and that and that. And we're going to talk about some more of the differences. But notice the two different places where these two stories come to be. P is poetry. The first one, 1:1, the very first one I read, it's poetic. And in fact, it actually breaks into verse in a couple of places. And by poetic, I don't mean the ancient sense of poetry like in the Odyssey. I mean poetic in the sense of highly refined language. These are people who have been writing for a while, which would be priests, right? J, the second story, is prose. It's a story that you would tell. And you know, I love how it kind of gets off track, starts talking about the rivers, and it's almost as if the storyteller's saying, you know, where there's gold, like they're face-to-face talking. P is very grandiose, the first story. Very grandiose. God speaks creation into existence. J is more like folklore. Hey, did you hear about that story with the serpent? Yeah, no, it was over there in that garden, where all those rivers are, and one of them, there's gold in it. P creates many humans, humankind. J creates one man. Now, we usually gloss over this in the reading, but in the first story, let us make humankind in our image. The understanding there is that it's plural. It's the species, right? It's not the man. In fact, there's no proper name in either of these stories until we get to Eve. No proper name. I want to unpack that a little bit for you in a minute. Oh, let me read you. Sorry, I had some examples here. So here's the poetry of 1. Let there be lights in the dome of let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night. And then in J, it's there he put a man he had formed, and out of the ground he made trees grow, right? Very prose-like, grandiose. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude, right? As opposed to, a river flows out of the Eden to water the garden, and it divides into 4 branches. Then God said, many in one, God said, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness. And then J says, then the Lord God, that's how you can tell the difference, by the way, in English, is Lord God He's always. And it's usually small caps in most Bibles. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. So in J, there's a forming. In fact, there are echoes there in the etymology of the words of a potter who's forming something in J, the second story. Whereas in the first story, in P, it's this speaking. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. Very also philosophical. God said, let us make humankind in our image. It's a philosophical concept. J is mythological. It's using symbols, right? And telling stories using symbols. And interestingly, for us, having just come out of Isis and Ishtar and Kali, the first story, the P story, is asexual. There's no sex happening there, right? It's completely asexual. It's philosophical instead of, there's no bodies in it, really. It's all kind of ideas. Whereas J's a little more visceral, although there's still not sex in it. So something switched, right, already. All right. Let's dig into it a little more. This is really interesting. And I think the P source, the word that we call Adam, is actually Hadam. I think that's wrong. Let's say Hadam in Hebrew. The man, except it's really, the word refers to dirt. And so a lot of translators have said it should be the earthling, the one made of earth, Hadam, right? And again, humankind, male and females as kinds, not individuals in the P source. We still, in the J source, we still have the Hadam word. Again, not a proper name, no proper names yet. And in this case, the earthling is breathed, God breathes into him, right? The breath of life, and he becomes a human soul. And then at the end, when Adam's, in the J story, remember Adam's created first, and you go through all of creation until you get to woman, and then Adam says, this is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, because she was taken out of me. That's pretty much analogous to the words man and woman. In Hebrew, it's ish and isha. Right? So it's really about assonance. It's about sounding alike. Man, woman, ish, isha. Right? And the idea is to make them sound similar, even though they're different. There is a rabbinical tradition. I'm sorry, it's not a rabbinical tradition. It's a rabbinical scholar who says, I'm just going to read you this. It actually makes a certain amount of sense. Remember, the earthling says, this is bone of my bone. According to Zevet, the rib is the wrong translation for the word here. Zevet believes that Selah should be translated as a nonspecific general term, such as one of Adam's lateral limbs. Thus, it refers to limbs lateral to the vertical axis of an erect human body, hands, feet, penis. Which of these lateral limbs lacks a bone? Human males do not have a penis bone, but many mammals do. Zevet concludes that in the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible, the woman was created from the man's baculum, or penis bone, to explain why this appendage does not have a bone. No charge for that. That's absolutely free scholarship. So the garden is created in the east. This is paradise, which is a Persian word that means a walled garden. I want to come back to that, this notion of walling yourself in. So let me read you now the rest of the story. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, right? It's very grounded. It's in the east, right? You know, in the east. And there he put the man, the earthling, whom he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life is also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You may freely eat of any tree in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you will not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall die." Hint, God's lying. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. This is not Satan, by the way. There's absolutely no... Satan is a figure in Hebrew literature that's actually, he's in Job, and he's more like an annoying attorney figure. You can see how he becomes Satan. But no, I love lawyers. We need lawyers. This is not Satan. So one of the challenges we have is not to read back onto this story through a Christian lens. There's no way this is Satan. It's a serpent. He's crafty. He said to the woman, "Did God really say, 'You shall not eat from any tree of the garden'?" Well, the woman said, "Well, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that's in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die.'" The serpent said to the woman, "You won't die." God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open. And you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. "Sold," said the woman. No, that's not what it says. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, which is the original purpose, it was a delight to the eyes, which is an original purpose, and that the tree was desired to make one wise, which is actually, yes, the original purpose, she took of its fruit and ate. Well, okay, we'll get to Lilith. So just again, to fix this, correct this notion, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband, who was with her. He was with her in the literal meaning of the story. He was with her. So none of this, Adam is not culpable here. He's standing right there. All right, St. Paul, I'm talking to you. Then the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. Now it's on. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. Sorry. This story, if this story is telling you anything, it's like, please don't take me literally, right? I think this, forgive me, I may end up laughing. I think this is one of the funniest passages in the Bible. But okay, so first of all, the Lord God's walking through the garden in the evening breeze because the Lord God doesn't want to get hot during the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God, Yahweh, the phrase there, the God, among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said, "Where are you?" He doesn't know. Of course he doesn't know. It's a story, right? You've got to have this conflict going on, these questions. And the man said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself." Who told you you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I told you not to eat from? And Adam, the progenitor of all men, bravely stood up to the Lord God and said, "The woman that you gave me, The woman that you gave me, she gave me the fruit and I ate. Then the Lord God turned to the woman and said, what is this you have done? And the woman said, the serpent tricked me. He was crafty. And I ate. Then the Lord God said to the serpent, because you've done this, cursed are you among all animals and among all wild creatures. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I'll put hatred between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will strike your head, the offspring will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. To the woman, notice this reverse order here. We start Adam, woman, serpent, now serpent, woman, Adam. To the woman, he said, I will greatly increase your pangs in childbearing. In pain, you'll bring forth children. Here's a hard one. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. I like to think it's because you have desire. I like to read it as a Buddhist text. It's your desire that's the problem. And to the man, he said, sorry, because you listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Cursed is the ground. That's weird. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it will bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. Maybe the ground's cursed because that's him. He's the earthling. Adam. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. The man named his wife Eve. Here, finally, we have a proper name, because she was the mother of all living. And the Lord God made garments of skins for the man and for his wife and clothed them. And then the Lord God said, see, I don't know who he's talking to. See, I guess the world. The man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, and now he might reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man. He drove him out. And at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim, a sword flaming and turning, to guard the way to the tree of life. Ah, this story. Fraught as it is, faulty as it is, funny as it is, that's my story. That's your story, too. Let's talk about how that might be. The Zen Buddhist scholar D.T. Suzuki heard this story. It is said. Joseph Campbell tells this story. So this Japanese Buddhist hears this story and he says, God against man, man against God, man against nature, nature against man, nature against God, God against nature. Strange religion. Indeed. Remember that I often talk about the fundamental split in the universe for Western peoples and people who are influenced by Western people. It's right here. The ground is cursed. We are separate from the earth from which we are made according to the story. And now there's this separation, there's this crack in the universe, and we can't bridge it. We can't fix it. There's no way out but through the desert. Notice, if you will, and if you've heard the Ishtar stories and the Isis and the Kali stories, that there are no other gods here, right? You no doubt saw some similarities to Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation story, and there are linguistic and mythological and symbolic similarities between those stories. But the storyteller here has an agenda, and it is to not let you think that there's any God stronger than Yahweh. Notice that I did not say a God that does not, other gods that do not exist. Monotheism is a relatively late development in Judaism in terms of its history. What you have is henotheism, the belief that Yahweh is above the other gods. This is not a hard thing to prove. You simply read the book of Exodus where there are contests, or the book of Kings where there are contests between the gods. You know, Aaron, Moses' sidekick, asked the magicians in Egypt, say, well, let's have a contest between your God and my God. And the point there is not to prove that those gods, those Egyptian gods, don't exist. It's to prove which one is more powerful. So for example, the deep in this text, God brooding over the face of the waters and the deep, that word there is essentially Tiamat. And you may remember Tiamat from Enuma Elish, the original goddess who gets split in two, and her name means sea, or the deep. And she gets split into the waters above and the waters below. So this is a religious corrective to Mesopotamian religion and mythology. The gods are gone, the sex is gone. We'll use some of the words because we have to. By the way, another one of those words is Elohim, which is plural, which came right over from Mesopotamia because there were gods. And so you get these strange constructions like, let us make man in our image, and now the man has become like one of us. It's kind of a linguistic oddity. And of course, the woman and the serpent. Here's a new thing in the world. Very new thing in the world. I'm going to let Joseph Campbell talk about it. This identification of the woman with sin, of the serpent with sin, thus of life itself with sin, is the twist that has been given to the Genesis story. I don't know of this idea anywhere else, he says. Maybe in Pandora. But what Pandora does is, Pandora's box, that's not sin. That's just trouble. Lots of trouble. This is sin. This is transgression with punishment. The idea in the biblical tradition of nature as we know it being corrupt, sex corrupt, and the female is the epitome of the corrupter. This is new. We haven't seen this before. This, of course, makes woman vulnerable. She's a conduit for this sin. She goes from life to sin, from the conduit of life to the conduit of sin, because life itself is sin. Nature itself is sin. Wow, that's, for all the damage it's caused, it's a brilliant move. If you want to disempower women, there it is. Just call them the conduit of sin and take that great power they have and make it a negative, make it evil. You can go right from there to any number of texts. I'll go to St. Paul in Timothy. So here's essentially the founder of the Christian church reading this story and saying, I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or argument. Also that the women should dress themselves modestly and decently in suitable clothing, not with your hair braided or with gold, pearls, or expensive clothes, but with good works, as is proper for women who profess reverence for God. Let a woman learn in silence with full submission. I permit no woman to teach in the Christian church or to have authority over any man. She is to keep silent. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived. But the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet she'll be saved through childbearing, provided they continue in faith, love, and holiness with modesty. I don't know if that ideology sounds familiar, but it's still alive and well. What might it really mean, right? We've seen, you can do with this story so many things. Oh, I forgot the Gnostic reading. Sorry. Let me do that on the next one. Start with the Gnostic reading. I love this reading, right? Fretting, it's fantastic. So if you're a Gnostic and you're reading this, you know that the world itself is corrupt, that God is too pure to exist in a corrupt world. All right? And so how are you going to read this story? Well, if you're a Gnostic, the hero of the story is the serpent. Because the serpent opens your eyes. Gnosticism means knowledge. The serpent gives knowledge. Who's the devil figure? God. Because he's trying to trap you into this garden and keep you stupid forever. Was that Karen who said that? Okay. That's right. In Gnosticism, knowledge is salvation. And so anything that brings knowledge is bringing you salvation. He might even be a divine teacher, this serpent. And what kind of God keeps you from knowledge? That's a good question, Charlie.
Well, I think there might be, our resident Gnostic here tonight, Aaron,
Oh, good.
address a bit of the difference between the demiurge and God.
Sure. Feel free.
I think your reading is, I think he's just pointing out that in Gnostic viewpoint, the God of the Old Testament isn't really God, and that there's God is above that.
Exactly.
That the figure that we call the demiurge is what is identified with the God of the Old Testament.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Being very general here. Thank you. It's a great reading. That reading makes more sense to me than any other reading, frankly. Because I don't know if you've read it and you're like, the serpent doesn't really lie. So why is he cursed? And the knowledge that we gain, don't we want that? Oh, anyway. For me, this is a story of innocence and experience. It's not a story of sin. We all live this story. You're born. There's a garden you live in if you're lucky and have good parents. There's a walled city, a walled garden that you live in. Nothing's going to hurt you. All your food's going to be provided for you. You're naked. You don't care. What's naked? To a baby. It's just babiness. Do you remember that Will Ferrell skit where he's got a new baby and he's like, grow up now. Why don't you grow? He's a German and he shows him a battleship and he's like, don't you see what we've done? Anyway, you got to find this. Grow up now. Become experienced, right? So this is William Blake, Songs of Innocence and Experience, right? A lot of the Songs of Innocence are about children. Little lamb, who made thee? And then in Experience, we go to tiger, tiger, burning bright, right? It's like, okay, from a lamb to a tiger. But this is our story. We live that way. If we're lucky, we have good parents. And then something happens. Something happens. We get knowledge. And it's like, oh, that. And we get expelled from that state. We get kicked out. And you know what? You can't go back. You can't go back to innocence. Your innocence of youth, of not even youth, of infancy. That's our story. It's a pretty simple story that we all live. That every human being lives psychologically. That we're born too soon. And because we're born too soon, we've got to have this protective firmament. The firmament's all around us. The chaos is all around us, like this. So this is, you may remember, this is the ancient Mesopotamian notion of, and therefore Israel, Jewish notion of heaven. But I see that and I think of consciousness and the unconscious, right? So we create this bubble. We get to live in it and then we don't. Yeah, so I just see that, I see that that's us with chaos all around us. And we have a moment, just a moment, when we don't know that there's light and dark and male and female, good and evil, and life and death. But once we know, it's over. We can't go back. I put this number in here because I was getting, this may not make any sense, but I was getting way too deep into the story. So I'm like, we start at 0, we go to 7, meaning that kind of completion, and on the 7th day God rested, and it was good, and it was all done. And then we go to 2, or multiplicity, the duality of the world, good and evil, light and dark, male and female, Adam and Eve. And we're trying to get back to the 1, which looks an awful lot like 0, actually. Anyway, never mind that. That's just my weird early morning thinking about this story. I really think we can say that this story is about the rise of humanity. It doesn't have to be about the fall. It's a really boring story, that we fell. What about our rise? We rose from innocence into experience. And we built this battleship, this German battleship. And we built all kinds of things. And we screwed up a bunch of stuff, but we're still here. We're still living. I'm going to end here with one of my favorite poems by one of my favorite poets, James Dickey. You may know him as the author of Deliverance. You may also know him as a son of a bitch, which he was. But he was a great poet. And whenever I think of the story of Adam and Eve, I think of this poem. It's called The Leap, and this term, in terms of innocence and experience, and what's lost and what's gained. The Leap by James Dickey. The only thing I have of Jane McNaughton is one instant of a dancing class dance. She was the fastest runner in the 7th grade, my scrapbook says, even when boys were beginning to be as big as the girls. But I do not have her running in my mind. Though Frances Lane is there, Agnes Fraser, Fat Betty Lou Black, and the boys against girls relays, we ran at recess. She must have run like the other girls, with her skirts tucked up so they would be like bloomers. But I cannot tell. That part of her is gone. What I do have is when she came, with the hem of her skirt where it should be for a young lady, into the annual dance of the dancing class we all hated, and with a light, grave leap, jumped and touched the end of one of the paper ring decorations to see if she could reach it. She could. And she reached me now, hanging in my mind from a brown chain of brittle paper, thin and muscular, wide-mouthed, eager to prove whatever it proves when you leap in a new dress, a new womanhood, among the boys whom you easily left in the dust of the passionless playground. If I said I saw in the paper where Jane McNaughton Hill, mother of 4, leapt to her death from the window of a downtown hotel, and that her body crushed in the top of a parked taxi, and that I held without trembling a picture of her lying cradled in that papery steel, as though lying in the grass, one shoe idly off, arms folded across her breast, I would not believe myself. I would say the convenient thing, that it was a bad dream of maturity, to see that eternal process, most obsessively wrong with the world, come out of her light, earth-spurning feet grown heavy. I would say that in the dusty heels of the playground, some boy who did not depend on speed of foot caught and betrayed her. Jane, stay where you are in my first mind. It was odd in that school at that dance. I and the other slow-footed yokels sat in corners cutting rings out of drawing paper before you leapt in your new dress and touched the end of something I began. Above the couples struggling on the floor, new men and women clutching at each other and prancing foolishly as bears. Hold on to that ring I made for you, Jane. My feet are nailed to the ground by dust I swallowed 30 years ago while I examine my hands. Thank you. There's so much artwork on Adam and Eve, thought I'd just let it play. All right, let's get into it.